broadcast.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to our webinar. Today we have a wonderful speaker. David Kohlberg is going to be talking to you about preventing violence at the workplace. He has been in the EAP field since 1983. He was 5 years as the EAP counselor for the Postal Service. He is one of our go-to people, and we love his work. And I'm going to turn it over to David.
Thank you, Maggie. I'm your presenter, as Maggie has said. In the room from Reliant Behavioral Health are Joe Bryson, Janet Levin, and Brenda Allen, and as well as Maggie. By way of housekeeping, I would like to ask participants to silence your phone or other devices so that you don't get too distracted and then have to ask catch-up questions. And there is a space on the right-hand side of the screen or where you can type in any questions or comments. This is our objective today, and we have a lot of material, so please forgive me for moving very quickly. One of the first points I'd like to make here is that this is an area that almost no one feels comfortable with, and that it's everybody's responsibility in the workplace to keep our workplaces safe. Here's a chance for you to vote. You should have a button that allows you to register your opinion, and I'll give you the results back in about a minute. Okay, that's the result. Could we see the results?
So 21%, 18% are very concerned, 73% are somewhat concerned, and 9% are not concerned at all.
Wow, that's good. I think we have the right people at our webinar. Keys to preventing violence. We need to know how to respond to the warning signs, implement our strategies, and have those strategies in place. And you've got to be able to use your own role to alert your staff and other resources that you'll need. Now, by way of facts, according to the Wall Street Journal, gosh, being hit by lightning is better than winning the lottery or having to be actually killed by a coworker. And we note that more incidents of workplace violence are reported for workers who are in high public contact areas. Naturally, we think of bank tellers and convenience store clerks, but we have a lot of folks in the home health care field as well who are also probably more at risk than somebody who sits in an office. So why do we all need to learn more? I think that when there is employee-on-employee violence, there's a much greater sense of being betrayed, and it has a higher shock value. Here's our working definition. Please note that it can include things like what Jackie Gleason used to say, one of these days, Alice, or somebody oughta, and you can fill in the blank. Those are veiled threats. They're not conditional threats, but they're things that can be considered a threat. Sometimes even gestures can do that. I think we can all, just let the bullet points come down. I think we all recognize a direct threat, but mostly threats are conveyed in a veiled manner or a conditional manner. For example, the two examples I had before are for a veiled threat, and we have the conditional threat is, if he comes back here one more time to talk to me about that, then I'm going to. That's the conditional kind of threat. Unfortunately, most employers in the United States don't really have an effective plan to deal with the crises and violence at the workplace. But there is a national standard for employers, and I'm sure if there are folks here who are officers in companies or managers or directors who would never want to answer the question why they didn't meet the national standard if it got to a courtroom. So, it's a sad comment on folks today. Another polling question, true or false? Violence is random and unpredictable because we can't anticipate it. We really can't do anything about it. So what do you think? Please vote. Let us know.
We have 93% false and 7% true.
7% true and 93% false. I would agree with the latter group. We can predict some things, and we should be open to the signs and symptoms thereof. Even where randomness seems to impact violence versus nonviolence in the workplace, we still have an ability to predict. Most people will give us a sign. If they won't give us a sign directly, they'll give a coworker signs that that is a risk. We know quite a bit about it. There's a bit of research, and because it's predictable, we can maybe do something to prevent it. You've heard the myth here. Here's the facts. We can choose to know a lot more about the potential violence, or we can choose to remain ignorant. So, as you can see, the largest group by far of perpetrators of physical violence in the workplace are outsiders, either strangers or customers. If you're in a retail or high customer contact environment, that's where your bigger risks are. But the second largest group is from employees, either current or previous past. And let's not forget when domestic violence comes to the workplace. So who are these perpetrators? For homicide, again, strangers, followed by customers, employees, and the domestic violence spillovers. There are implications of this for us in how we treat other people, how we treat our customers, how we treat outsiders, and what visible signs of security in our workplaces are there, because those are shown to be a deterrent. Warning signs only show potential, and participants here will get the chance to reflect on some of these indicators and signs, but that's not to become a checklist knowing that if you get up to 50 points, then somebody is going to be violent. We've also had situations where nobody has seen it coming. Can the aggressors be identified? Yes. Now, I think we've all heard the phrase going postal. I'd like to clarify that. We're using it as an acronym for our slideshow, but going postal is also more of a myth. The incidence of violence in the Postal Service is actually lower than the rest of the population. But I think it has a bigger impact because the Postal Service is one of the most trusted agencies in the federal government. We send our rent money, we send our wills, we send our Christmas presents and cards. So sort of like Santa Claus, it becomes violent when that happens. So it makes a big impact. All right. Now, factors we can notice are begun here. And one of the first things we note is that what I've done in the past is a good predictor for what I will do in the future. So if I've been violent, then maybe I will be violent again. If I've made threats, maybe I will make threats again and maybe have a greater propensity to it. Now we can see how that goes across all things, and we're not just talking about criminals, because law enforcement officers and also combat military vets are trained in controlled violence. So we've all heard the stereotype of, well, he was kind of a loner, kept to himself, nobody knew much about him, right? Actually, this reflects more of a disengagement and a feeling that maybe other people don't matter as much, and even that individual's opinions don't matter much. We do see emotional problems and substance abuse as part of this, and gosh, we have relationships with people that are not working. Some of them are quite painful, and they will augment the potential for people to take action at work. And obsessiveness, one of the questions that we ask, to what degree do people glorify other acts of violence by other people? To what degree do people think about, talk about, shop for weapons? Do we have people who are really into just one particular thing about their work to the detriment or neglecting others? Okay. Some observable signs are this violent and threatening behavior. Yet sometimes these aren't heard. We've got a way of rationalizing this. We often don't notice some of these things. We say to ourselves, well, that's just so-and-so. That's the way he is. That's the way she is. And we find ourselves making excuses for conduct that really shouldn't be taking place at the work. We do notice things that are changing. Appearance, behavior, even performance at work. We'll notice mood swings. We'll notice when people are really stressed out or depressed. We have to stay alert, and we have to keep our heads and our hearts open to this. If we just rationalize it, saying, well, everybody's feeling down, then we may miss some sign that we should actually act on. Now, what's the attitude towards work? As a military veteran, I often heard or even said the acronym SSDD, which stands for Same Stuff, Different Day. If I am in that kind of rut or routine at work, maybe I should do something to make a change there. But you know, you can hear remarks like this and ignore them and dismiss them, or you can choose to inquire about them. And if people are really into blaming, if people don't seem to have any empathy for customers when they're doing customer service, or empathy for their coworkers or even their managers, then these are things that you can see. Well, here's the S for postal showing up here. The degree to which we have access to and familiarity with weapons is a predictor. Now remember that military, especially combat veterans, and law enforcement officers and former law enforcement officers, also hunters, may be higher on the potential scale than others. And we've noticed in recent years a real fascination across the country with America's weapon, the AR-15, which is way more firepower, in my opinion, than most people actually need. Now, when you see that kind of preoccupation, it's time to maybe take some action, and one of the actions you can take will be to inquire and find out where that person is actually coming from. Well, here's something we bump into quite a bit. We've all had this sensation of trying to keep 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 balls in the air at the same time, and then somebody throws in a chainsaw and there's no way we can juggle things. Well, this chainsaw can be things like, I didn't get the promotion I wanted. I got laid off. I got a poor review. You know, my house was going into foreclosure. Now I'm trying to work out a deal with the lender, but that's tough. Or my husband, my wife just left me. So these are stressors that sometimes come together and form like a perfect storm. And that can be the thing that tips the balance. And you see this especially where people have personalized what's going on, thinking that it's either about them or somebody's out to get them. Now, responding to the potential violence in the workplace, we have to have some kind of way to evaluate the seriousness. Now, employers who do follow the national standards have this in place. My service with the Postal Service, EAP, got me a spot on what was called the Threat Assessment Team, a multidisciplinary group of people who work for the Postal Service who sat down on a regular basis and followed up on past incidents as well as assessed current ones. I think in addition to something like that that's formal and taking place in the workplace, each person has kind of an obligation to do a personal assessment and to convey any concerns they have to the right person in the workplace. I would go to my manager, to my supervisor, to human resources, and there are a number of other resources, including your EAP, that can help you make that decision. So what kind of things should we consider problematic and we should consider reporting? These can include things that, like driving a lift truck or other workplace vehicle close to other employees in an attempt to scare them, dropping a pallet of something close to employees, trying to control things in the workplace through bullying or displays of temper. And we also see subtle sabotage of operations. Now, here's something that I note more for office staff than I do for people who are working hands-on doing physical labor. I would call that the Queen Bee syndrome, in which one employee will be a bully in a very subtle sense, and they kind of organize the workforce and they take on an informal and very real type of authority. That really gets things going, and when a manager or supervisor takes action against that person, they often get unwanted results. Okay. Because then it becomes personal. I've seen it over and over where someone who was disciplined for actually doing Queen Bee or other bullying behaviors has now taken it personally and complains that you in management or you as a supervisor are persecuting them or other people are taking advantage of them. We see people who don't really regard boundaries. I've seen people who are on suspension from their job show up across the street from the workplace and show off their weapons to friends or passersby. Now, would you take that seriously as a threat? I certainly did. I would say that the frequency of complaints here gets higher and higher as the threat gets higher and higher. And you will hear from other people as well as what you hear from the person that you're mostly concerned about. So let's say you're talking to the person that you're most concerned about. I call these critical conversations. It's our job in this kind of situation to turn the volume down on intensity, to turn the volume down volumetrically as well. So we want to be able to convey things. We want to be able to assess things using what we know about communication skills. Now, we all need the skills, but I know that It takes practice to develop skills. But if we practice the skills, we can keep a clear head in the situation, and we will not have to worry as much about it. Here's something we know about communication. The verbal part of our message is the least regarded and least heard part of our message. Our nonverbal signals and what I call paraverbals, our tone of voice, pitch, and pacing, represent about 85% of the conversation that's heard. So we really want to work at bringing the volume or intensity down. For nonverbal, if we have fans of Cesar Millan and the Dog Whisperer, you know, he always says, show calmness. You want to be calm. You want to get yourself under control. Well, the same would be true in this kind of situation, because everybody has a tell. We all show what is going on inside us in some way or another. So you need to be confident in yourself. Don't get cocky. Just try to show your calmness. If it's uncomfortable for you, say, I'm uncomfortable, and you're probably uncomfortable too. That's a helpful thing. And whatever you regard as good personal space to give, you need to give several times that normal space to this person. Never approaching them to touch them, and don't spend too much time looking at them, or then they wonder why you're doing that. Now, the whole business about staying calm is called lending an ego. When I remain calm, others can remain calm, and they can calm down as well. One of the things that I look at in terms of my physical surrounding is also, if there's a door, I often like to have the door behind me. Sometimes you want the person to leave. For example, no bank teller would get in the way of a robber trying to leave the bank. But we can de-escalate things. You can watch a conversation that's occurring across the street or a length of a football field away and tell whether or not people are communicating intimately or they're having some kind of conflict with one another. You can observe the posture. Use an open stance. Don't cross your arms. Don't make big, large gestures with your hands or your fists. And try to keep your hands in view. The open stance that you want to convey, you can do that while sitting down. By the way, if you are sitting down, I would not lean back in my chair and put my hands behind my head. That conveys a sense of perhaps disregard or dismissiveness to other people, like they're not important. I would lean forward like you're really trying to hear them. If you need to put something down or you need to pick something up, let people know, I'm going to pick up my phone right now, or I need to put this box down because it's getting kind of heavy. Just don't do anything suddenly. No surprises here is the rule. If you have something in your hand that could be viewed as a weapon, please get rid of it as quickly as you can. This is for de-escalation. It's not for self-protection for you. So if the box makes you feel like that could be a weapon, maybe you ought to put it down. So, managing your emotions helps you manage your words. And only practice will make sure that you can really perform. Your speech should be slow and calm and clear. Now, if you ordinarily have a slow, calm, and clear voice, it may be that you need to increase your intensity just a little bit. The lower pitch the voice usually conveys a sense of calmness or relaxation. The higher pitched voice and rapid pacing of speech conveys a sense of high distress or stress. Try to not beat around the bush, but simply get to the point. Can I be frank about this? Maybe a phrase that you're going to want to add to your vocabulary. When offering another point of view, I usually recommend preceding it with, I don't know if you'd want to hear another point of view that might be different. Most people, if you're successful so far in helping them calm down, will want to hear a differing point of view. But if they don't, they don't. Escalating your volume, escalating your need to get your point across is not going to help. It will actually escalate the other person, and you'll be in a power struggle. If you can, show the person that you're trying to understand their point of view. There are several tricks for that, but remember, you want to show them that you are trying to understand. That makes me calmer, that makes other people calmer as well. And it actually gives you another skill for managing your emotions. If you start looking at, okay, my job here is to try to understand, then you may forget about how scared you were or how much responsibility you have or how alone you may feel in this position. Gives us an alternate focus. I do have control to the greater part of my language and my emotions, but I can get that hijacked. I suspect you can too. Each of us will have a different trick for getting that calmness going again. One of the things that I remember is Kipling's poem, If. And a line in it says, if you can keep your head while others are losing theirs. Well, that's a good skill to have. Because of my practice of yoga, I will go into the mountain position in which I feel fully grounded, weight evenly distributed, and I feel stronger and more confident. You can also do this with your sit bones if you're sitting down. You can visualize things, everything from an elevator or an escalator to a circle of light around you. Remember, it's your job to try to understand, to de-escalate the situation, not to take other actions. Just try to be as creative as you can be in turning the volume down. Along the way, you'll have to read things. You'll read their verbal cues, but you'll hear more of the body language and expression clues. If in doubt, trust your instincts on this. In short, if you feel or sense a threat, or you feel like it's threatening, or more threatening, or it's escalating in threat potential, then try to do something different. These are things that can be practiced. These are things that can be learned, and we teach them when we try to teach de-escalation techniques. Whatever you do, don't dismiss, don't go against what your gut is telling you. If all of your instincts tell you to run, maybe you should consider looking for the door. De-escalation to avoid. Actually, these are escalating things. How many of us, when we are approached by somebody who is angry, tend to get angry back? We meet hostility with hostility. We sometimes put people down. We don't show anything. I once watched a supervisor walk around the post office in the morning with a clipboard and never raised her eyes to speak to her carriers. She said, what can I do to get across to them? I said, well, you can say good morning and actually look at them and mean it. Don't say talk to the hand or that's not my department. If people are looking for help and they're talking to you about it, you can de-escalate things by saying, let's find out who needs to hear this. Let's find who the right person is to deal with. I'm going to be on your side in that effort. Don't just give them the runaround. there are so many dismissive, critical, and put-down messages that we can send non-verbally with our expression, tone of voice, and pacing, as well as our words. So a good rule of thumb here is to try to remember how you want things to go and try to remember the message that you would like to have heard by your employee or by your colleague or your coworker. You know, this is almost invariably true. It's also used by people who are professional hostage negotiators. If you can show that you care, if you can show that you give a darn about the other person and what happens here, you can convey that. I think that I would have to calm myself first to show that. I'd have to keep first in my mind what I wanted to have happen. And I would listen like my life depended on it, because it just might. Seriously consider what their concern is and their ideas for resolving it, because if you don't see the solution, maybe they have had time to consider it for months or even years. Maybe you want to have the benefit of their thinking as well. Not to mention the fact that if their resolution can be incorporated in your response, maybe, just maybe, you can de-escalate them all the way down. Now, let's say that you have a person who's presenting demands or making requests of you that you really don't know about. If you don't readily see that solution, ask for time to do some research and then get back to them as quickly as possible. If you make that part of your everyday behaviors, then you are going to be seen as more credible in this high-tension situation. So always follow back up and check in to see how things are going. Here's the truth about people. Each of us behave as if what we're thinking is some sort of objective reality, when it's simply from our point of view. Now, they're acting on their point of view, and we act on ours. A lot of times when I see conduct or behavior that is concerning, I will try to reframe that into feelings if I can. And even if that person that I'm working with at the moment doesn't have a way to express them, it's possible for me to say, you know, I realize that I would just be so frustrated beyond belief, or I would be so angry beyond belief if this were happening to me, or if I felt the same way as you were. That gives them a label for what's happening, and a label helps them to understand it and maybe control it. Try to understand the other person's point of view. You have to show this. So ask questions. Also, recap skillfully, not in some kind of formulaic or robot way, what you're hearing from the other person. And be sure you don't convey your judgments while you're doing that. It's very critical. If you have a judgment about it, try to give all of the credibility to this other person. I would say that the biggest barrier to listening is preparing our counter-argument or rebuttal of what's being said. I know that every time I go there, I shut off my ears and I shut off my head and my heart, and I'm just trying to compete with the other person. I would say don't waste time doing that. Show that you really want to know. Ask the questions that help clarify things. Ask the questions about what they want to have happen. Because what they want to have happen may be the same thing you want to have happen. And if so, you'll begin to work with the person instead of against them. All of this de-escalates things. It allows people many opportunities to calm themselves. If I can, I avoid a hostile confrontation. I try to reframe as much as possible. Instead of saying, I'm not going to have this argument with you right now, I would say, this is an important conversation. I think we need to have this, and I'm glad you brought this up. Remember, if you are talking to somebody who is subordinate, then that person has actually climbed the mountain to bring something to attention to you, and they may be expressing things unskillfully or with an extra amount of emphasis that you don't need. What you want to do is validate. Validate, validate, validate. Validate how they feel, validate their point of view to the extent that you can. Remember, it's our goal here to try to turn the volume down. Now, what techniques have you learned in the past that helps convey that you're trying to understand this other person? One of the things that I've learned for me is that asking pertinent questions, asking informational questions, asking open-ended questions, all of those are helpful. And when I get out my tablet to take notes, that really shows that I'm trying to understand it and not being dismissive. I'm going to always let the other person have their say. Then I'm going to ask if they're open to hearing my say. I have certainly paid my entrance fee for that to happen. People are not likely to be skillful. They're under high stress. You're under high stress. So when people say things to you like you're always on the side of, or things that are perhaps personal about you, don't take them personally. Regard them as unskillful behavior, that's all. And how do I try to not be defensive? That's kind of tough, isn't it? Because I feel like sometimes I have to defend myself. Now, what can I do? Sometimes I simply tell the truth and say, I kind of feel defensive right now, and by doing that, I can stop being defensive. It's just a little trick. Remember, what happens, how people see things, it's almost never about you. So depersonalize wherever you can. That way you're not going to have a knee-jerk reaction to make things worse. I not only allow people to suggest things, I listen for solution type of behavior or solution kind of thinking. So if somebody says, if we could only do things this way, then that would be helpful. Or why don't you keep us on different shifts? That will help. Allow them to do that, explore those solutions with them, solicit solutions from them. I've heard some really great operational solutions to problems that are having while a person is in high stress. It's because they've rehearsed them so many times in their mind, they're actually making sense. Now, we're often in a position where we want to make a promise. Well, let me take care of that, or I'll make them stop doing that, or I can make this go away. Don't make any promises you can't keep. This person is likely to hold your feet to the fire, to hold you accountable for what you've promised to do. Sometimes you have to say, well, we'll see, or let's find out who we need to talk to. Let's explore this more. We're taking it serious. We want to look at your solution. We want to allow them as much leeway in suggesting solutions that we can. We don't have to adopt them, but more likely outcome for resolution is going to be if some part of their solution is part of the solution that you come up with eventually. Now, getting into a win-win problem resolution is kind of tricky because sometimes it's really hard to see. try to see this anyway and look for whatever next steps that can cool things down and lead to more problem solving. A primary rule of solving problems is that until I deal with the emotions, until I listen to the emotions, until that person is calmer, I really can't spend a whole lot of time solving a problem with them. Now, win-win may be that you give credence to their solution. Maybe you try their solution as an experiment to see what will happen. That's not a bad way to go sometimes, as long as it's not illegal, as long as it doesn't place people more at risk. Remember, they're much more likely to support a solution that they've had something to do with. Now, whatever next steps you take, whatever next steps you both agree to, this is something that you have to take whatever action you're going to take so that you can call that other person accountable for what they were supposed to do. Show them that you're following through. I talked to so-and-so about this like we agreed, and he's having to take that to his manager. You give them a status update so that you are now quarterbacking the solution. You are now advocating for this person's solution. That helps keep things cool. Now, I would substitute here the word consultation as opposed to supervision, because sometimes I don't consult the person who is my direct supervisor. I do need to report things to my direct supervisor, but how I respond to things, perhaps I will want to talk to someone at the Employee Assistance Program, or perhaps I'll want to talk to somebody in Human Resources, or I want to talk to somebody that I know is on a risk assessment or threat assessment team. I would say when you're feeling the heat of a hostile person, when you're getting the signs and signals of potential violence, we all need consultation, and it's okay to let the other person know you're going to get consultation. I need to check with so-and-so to see what would be the best way to proceed. Sometimes, though, we don't want to do this. Why do we not want to do it? We don't want to show our weakness. We don't want to have other people, including our bosses, see us as incapable or weak as a leader. So when these things happen, when you see the signs and signals, there are plenty of people to talk to. You've got resources. Now, sometimes we need help just getting a better perspective on the situation. Now, he's that way with everybody, or she's that way with everybody. Don't take it personally. Here's things that have helped. You can get that by talking to other people. You can talk to management. You can talk to human resources, legal, if you have a health department function or occupational health function or an employee assistance program. Those are built-in resources, and you can usually reach them in a pinch. Consider safety first. So if you have certain things that you've prepared for and you have safety procedures, take care of them. You're going to want to act sometimes first before you ask. So, I would say, know who's on your team. And know, and this is from the quote of the day from yesterday, there's the time in the life of every problem when it's big enough to see, yet small enough to solve. So, try to catch things early. Try to catch them when they're still small enough to solve. And know who your team is. You might want to practice calling on them just so that you have that skill down. As I said earlier, safety is a primary consideration. Backing off, creating more distance can relieve stress until the other person calms a little bit or until other solutions are found. I often have been talking to someone on the telephone who is potentially violent or potentially suicidal and said to them, I'm going to ask a colleague to see if we can't get some assistance for you to help solve this problem. I will say that. And if I'm going to make a telephone call to somebody else, I will let them hear what I'm saying, and I will say things very clearly and non-judgmentally when I do that. If it's your company policy to call for law enforcement assistance, then that's what you want to do. Now, know that if you do that, that means that you've assessed the situation as having a very high risk for the physical safety of other people or yourself. So keep that as your nuclear option. Once again, if somebody has confronted you in front of an audience of people, don't try to separate this person from other people. Don't try to detain them, even though it makes sense to try to do that. You don't have the right to do that legally, and you don't want to do anything to escalate things into the physical realm. We can do things on the front end, though. How many of us will do law enforcement background checks as part of our hiring practices? Can you do that? What's the value of doing that? Do we have a committee of stakeholders in the organization that addresses workplace violence or safety or other risk factors? If you don't, that's something to possibly think about. I would say this might also be the committee that meets to assess a threat. If you establish zero tolerance policy, you've got to show that you're going to enforce it as well. There need to be some sort of visible consequences. Publishing a bulletin or memo or tacking it to the bulletin board is not going to do very much if you don't put legs on it. You have to follow through with your words. Now, some of us work in organizations and where we've had people who are outside stakeholders, perhaps our insurers or perhaps our corporate counsel has a vested interest in doing a company risk assessment. Why not go ahead and get that? Sometimes local law enforcement agencies like to do that. They'll help show you where you're falling down and where you're being really good at doing your job. Have this audited, and wherever there's improvements required, try to make those improvements. I know we're always asking people to do more, and sometimes we have fewer resources to do that in. In my work with banks that have been robbed, I have noticed that banks will put in bandit barriers after a location or branch has been robbed. That's improving the security measures, and perhaps it would be very expensive to do this all across the thousands of branches that they may have. They're doing it piecemeal, they're doing it one at a time. Get your plan in place. Do you have an evacuation plan for your building? I'll bet it's posted on the wall. No, you can have a response to crisis plan. You can use the employee assistance program, not just as a place to send people that are having problems. And that's a really good use of it, but you can use their consultation on instituting any of these key preventive measures. These key preventive measures are now part of the national standard, and I hope that no one ever gets called to account on that. Threat assessment team, the best kind is multidisciplinary. We have people from operations, we may have people from HR, we may have a representative who is phoning in from the EAP, we may have people from a labor union or perhaps a couple of labor unions on this committee. If you have an occupational health function, you may have that there. So think about who needs to be on that type of team, and think about how things will get reported. Now, in the Postal Service, things usually get reported to a make the call number, which is available 24/7 nationally. But since most people know the HR manager's name and telephone number, they'll call him directly. Look at your pre-employment screening. Use the Employee Assistance Program as a resource for knowledge, for assessment. Consult with them on how best to make management-assisted referrals, and try to get all of your employees at every level trained on workplace violence and what to do. Supervisors and managers may have to have special training because you guys see things from a different perspective, and that would be a valuable perspective to cash in on. You may have a greater responsibility. Now, we've talked about substance abuse testing. Recently, there's a case made against doing substance abuse testing, but since we can see that risk goes up with alcohol or other drug use, sometimes this is a good policy. Sometimes this is the way to go. I would support it. Now, we have about 7 minutes left in our call, and I'd like to see if there any questions or comments so far. Well, remember, at Reliant Behavioral Health, you have folks that you can consult when you need it. You can have folks to consult when you don't need it, which is often the better time to do it, just to know how things can be improved in your workplace. So use the Employee Assistance Program. It's free. It's confidential. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was a lot of great information, and hopefully we'll see all of you next month.